Welcome back to News Central TV, and we are still having conversations on the International Youth Day with the theme for this year's celebration, Intergenerational Solidarity, Creating a World for All Ages. And we've had a very, very rich conversation since 10 a.m. This morning, but of course it continues. This morning we're joined by a fuller house. And of course, it consists of Ina Hengari, who's a member of Parliament in Namibia, who's just joining us from Windhoek, Namibia. Good morning, Ina. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Good morning, Ina. Thank you for joining us. And also we have our in-house guest, MAYOWA John AJIBODU, the youth advocate and founder of SHUN Unemployment, Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you for joining us, MAYOWA.
No, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay. And finally, we have Luwazi Somia, the senior researcher, Southern African Liaison Office, Cape Town, South Africa. Thank you, Luwazi, for joining us.
It's a pleasure joining you.
All right, I'll probably start with, let's start with Luwazi, of course, who's joined us from South Africa. I want us, to start with the general theme, intergenerational solidarity, creating a world of, for all ages. We spoke a little bit about ageism a few minutes ago, but I want your take on how any of this can be achieved, and if it really is achievable in today's continent of Africa.
So I would like to start off by a famous German philosopher and sociologist, Robert Michels, who described the notion of the iron law of the oligarchy, where he describes any society or any organization that does not have a constant replenishment of new blood within that organization tends to build up oligarchical tendencies and creates undemocratic practices, and that obviously leads to corruption and other malpractices that we've seen. So we have seen this phenomenon manifesting within our states, within the region, and we have seen this phenomenon manifest within even the private sector within our region, where young blood is not given entrance into the spaces and inject new ideas and new thinking into these spaces. And it's because of these oligarchical tendencies that have manufactured, even post the post-liberation movement period, that has created animosity between young people and the older. And part of this animosity that has been created is young people stepping up and saying, we want our voices heard. And old people closing their ranks because they still think that young people are immature to lead our countries and lead the private sector. But obviously, a good, successful nations understand that the involvement of young people is critical to the national development. And this is what is keeping us back within the African continent. It is politics of respect that has facilitated a process where the senior generations have closed down the space for young people for getting full participation into electoral processes. We've seen it with post-liberation movements within Southern Africa, and we've seen it with other movements within North Africa and at times within West Africa. And part and parcel of this is the manifestation of these oligarchical tendencies leads to corruption, leads to the suppression of human rights, and therefore a dialogue is very necessary between different generations in order for us to facilitate not only the wisdom that is taken from the older generations, but the new ideas that will take us forward as a society. But as long as you do not get those new ideas within your system, societies within the African continent will continue being backwards in comparison to their global peers internationally.
All right, thank you, Luwazi. Now, another sub-theme that I would like for us to discuss is the bilateral relations between the African states. And I'm going to be throwing this question at MAYOWA because it relates to unemployment. Now, let's talk about the unemployment level. We were discussing that earlier, and now I want us to look at a wider scope. Now, looking at the youth in diaspora. For example, we know that the unemployment level in Europe right now is alarming. Now, what would you say the government of both Europe and maybe the African countries where the youth were before they migrated or moved, what would you say the government of both countries can do to help the situation? That's talking about the unemployment level now. What input do you think the government can, put in to reduce that level of unemployment?
All right, thank you so much. First, I will start by starting from the home, which is Nigeria, and then I take it beyond. I think one of the major problems is not creating platform and not giving the youth opportunity to engage in those platforms, sustaining platforms, all right? So the question that comes to mind is other countries around the world, China, the Asian countries and all of that, don't let me mention. Now, what do they do differently and why do they have low turnout of unemployment in those countries? Simple, because the government created system, created structure, and they have platforms that could, help youth. For instance, Nigerians, that's why you hear right now, there's a common saying that every average Nigerian that travels or that jackpass, so to say, in Nigeria, do well, outside the country. Why? Because Nigerians are very creative, they are innovative. So the limitation to their creativity and innovation is the platform, is the structure. So Europe, as it were, the government are more concerned about running government than running the people that makes up government. All right, so if your focus is in solving your pocket or getting more power, because every state wants to get power, of course. Why do I want to buy more arms? Why do I want to have more ballistic weapon and all of that? It's because I want to be seen as powerful. But truly, what makes a country is the people. And so if you feed the people, power is yours. The people will represent the country, the people will represent whatever continent you're representing. So the government is not creating platforms. So that's why you have high rate of mushroom growth of unemployment, for instance, in Nigeria and in Europe you mentioned. So what does the government do? Really creates platform. And this platform could be give youth opportunity to strive, give youth opportunity to develop their skills, give youth opportunity to show what they have. And that's what Asian countries are doing. Some of these brands that you see coming to Nigerians are developed by younger minds. All right, so if platforms are created for these younger people, right now we won't be talking about Europe having high turnout of unemployment or Nigeria having 33.3% of unemployed people in Nigeria. So I feel the government needs to look beyond just creating wealth for themselves or creating power, but to focus more internally about developing the youth and empowering them with the right skills.
All right. We're making the conversation a little broader. I want us to bring in Ina Hengari on the perspective with regards bilateral relationships between African states. We currently have, in the last 2 days, reported of Anthony Blinken, who's, of course, come for his African trip. He's been to South Africa, I believe, and, of course, also been having conversations with the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda because of the little crisis between both countries currently. But I want us to speak about, I want Ina to speak about how we can fix the relationships between African countries, where we currently stand with regards bilateral relations, and what maybe must change if we need to have a better, stronger standing continent.
Thank you very much. I think when we talk about building solidarity, I do think there's an aspect to it in terms of building and strengthening relations with these various African states. And so I think when we talk about building intergenerational solidarity, it also encapsulates the aspect of how do we strengthen bilateral relations between the African countries. And I think where we can strengthen that and how to strengthen those bilateral relations is really looking at the shared problems. I mean, earlier on, you were talking about youth unemployment. We'll talk about a lot of issues that young people are faced with, which most African countries have in common. In Namibia, youth unemployment is over 50%. In South Africa, I mean, it's one common factor amongst all these different countries. And so I think looking at African countries that are doing better in different aspects and also just exchanging notes. Botswana is doing quite well in terms of creating spaces where young people can be consulted, where young people are involved in decision making and so forth. So I do think African states can look at where we have issues that are common in terms of youth unemployment, young people who struggle to enter new spaces like the political space, for example. You find that in most African countries, young people are often met with a lot of resistance, especially in governance and in politics. So there is an opportunity and perhaps a window where African countries can exchange notes on youth unemployment, can exchange notes on how to create a space for young people where they can express themselves in their different talents and also just express themselves in terms of ideas on how to turn around political climate, on ideas how to turn around the economy. So I think that this year's theme is so relevant in such a way that the conversation is not just about intergenerational dialogue anymore, it's about intergenerational solidarity. So how do we ensure we support one another? Those obviously in Nigeria, how can we come together? How can South Africa and Namibia collaborate in addressing youth issues and beyond.
Thank you so much for that, Ina. Now, let me also bring in Luwazi, still talking about the issue of unemployment as it relates to bilateral relations. Now, we've seen a lot of xenophobic attacks between different African countries, talking about South Africa and Nigeria and Ghana and, so many African countries. And one of the major reasons for this is still the issue of unemployment and the economy. Now, my question is, how do we draw the line? How do we make these youths from these different parts of the country live together and adapt, cooperate with each other, seeing how, the world has evolved, the level of competitiveness has also evolved because the economy, we have so many different levels of economic crisis in different African countries. So how do we, bring ourselves to live together in the midst of this chaos?
So the African Continental Free Trade Agreement highlights one very critical issue, that we as an African continent are not integrated enough. And part and parcel of our lack of integration is the creation of mistrust on the other. And what political actors have sought to do is play against those differences in order for them to scapegoat dealing with the problems at hand. And part and parcel of that is greater people-to-people interaction amongst young people. What we have failed to as a generation is establishing greater trips towards understanding the situation of other young people within our continent. You must remember that during the liberation period against colonialism, young people across the continent sang liberation songs of other countries because they celebrated the heroes of other countries because they understood the plight of those people, and therefore created greater networks amongst young people throughout the continent. We no longer have those greater networks. We might have social media that has made the world very much smaller, but it has not made us understand one another. And that's part and parcel of what we need to do, greater people-to-people interaction. Number two is dealing with the issues of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Because as long as you do not deal with the fundamentals of the economy of dealing with poverty, inequality, and unemployment, you'll forever have a situation where the locals will always meet out against those who are always marginalized, and that's the newcomer, the most vulnerable person within the community, and that's the one who's seen as a foreigner. And number three is that we as Africans must understand that these borders are colonially generated and made, and therefore they are superficial and not intrinsic towards our identity as people of the African continent. And part and parcel of that is understanding that we can overcome the colonial and our constraints that are created by these borders that are facilitated under development within our continent and has kept us separated. And part and parcel of us being segregated at this much includes the exploitation of our resources as a continent. We'll continuously have our resources exploited, and we'll continue languishing in poverty as long as we do not seek a common basis for our development. And this is why I agree with the Honorable MP from Namibia, that we need greater people-to-people interaction and solidarity amongst each other as young people. But for us as a continent to move forward, we need to facilitate a process where we ensure that our common development is intrinsically linked to one another. So that means African governments must call out to one another when issues around human rights abuses are being carried out in other countries. We as young people must stand up for one another when we see fellow young people are being treated and are being mistreated by fellow governments. And we must continue to fight for the common good in terms of our economic development and regional integration as a continent. So these multiple faceted situations will build into one common aspect of us trying to understand one another as a continent and to build that social capital that will facilitate greater people to understanding and therefore dealing with the issue of xenophobia, because we fear that is unknown rather than that is known. So we need to deal with that fear factor.
Very perfectly put. I know that we would always argue and would always have our differences across the continent, tribe and the likes, and would always argue who has the best jollof rice, who makes the best cooking. But it's also important, one of the things that Wazi just said, that the people-to-people solidarity must always stand firm. And I want to bring back Ina to speak on that. The International Youth Day has been celebrated since the year 2000, on the 12th of August. This is 22 years later. We've seen a completely new world in the last 22 decades. Social media has become a thing today. So, Ina, I want you to speak on, the powers that the young people in Africa have in their hands on their social media platforms, what is currently available to them to make a difference with themselves and with their continent, simply by just uniting or using the platforms that they currently have?
Yeah. Well, I agree with you when you say we have young people have sort of reshaped, and even the world is now one village. And I think COVID-19 has really shown us that so much can be done using social media. And one of the platforms that I always advocate for is having different spaces, whether it's on Twitter, having conversations on Instagram, inviting young people to really, because in essence, what it is that it is building consensus amongst young people. It goes beyond sharing problems, it goes beyond sharing the stories of our struggles. It is really, in essence, exchanging ideas and having the ability to influence decision-making in various countries. In my country, one of the programs that I've run myself is called it's a space called Youth Talk Namibia. And what we do with that particular space is invite young people from various countries. And what we've done over last year and this year is have conversations, not just about the problems that we face in our different countries, but also really exchange notes on the various policies that are implemented in our different countries. I know that Kenya, for example, has a policy in place where their government at least distributes or allocates 30% of all government procurement tenders to young people. That is something Namibia right now that Namibia is looking at right now, and that is basically to really empower young people. I also want to talk about the policy. I think for a continent that is largely dominated by young people, we have very little government policies that are youth-oriented. Very few policies in our African continent or on the continent speak to youth issues. Very few policies in various countries actually talk about the youth bulge and how to get them in a place where they can now be active contributors to their GDP and be active contributors to their economies. So in terms of social media, for me, it should be about having discussions, progressive discussions on how to turn around our economies, on how to turn around our politics, and ensuring that young people are now taking up space in the politics. Young people are taking up space in governance and leadership.
And I would also like to bring MAYOWA in on this same issue. Now, we know that the young people are now tech savvy, they're now creatives, they know a lot of these things. Just like Ina has said, the young people are, taking a step forward, taking the initiatives. How else do you think that the young people, especially in Africa, can, take these initiatives to bring the attention to themselves and also to put themselves at the forefront of decision making? Because at the end of the day, the young people do not necessarily have to wait for the government or, organizations to bring them forward. They can, with their skills and abilities, push themselves forward. So what are the ways you think that the young people can do this?
All right, so I'd like to be practical. I'll use myself as an instance. So I, for one, started something about 6 years ago, which is one of the reasons why I'm here, and I've been doing this for 6 years. And every day of my life, I keep putting out content online using the tools that is made available. Right now, government is not creating the platform. That is the problem, but I am not limited by that problem. So rather than focus on the problem, I ask myself, how do I better project myself? So I started using all the platforms available. The world has become a global village. So I can pass a message from here to Namibia. I can pass a message from here to Ghana using my cell phone, just by having internet connection. Last year, International Youth Day, I had a conference, a Pan-African conference, where I had about 7 different African nations join, and we had thousands of people who joined from different African nations. What do? I use Zoom, I use Instagram, I use my WhatsApp, I use my Facebook, and that same conference gave me the opportunity to sit with people. So if the opportunity is not coming, if the government is not providing the opportunity, we need to provide the opportunity for ourselves. Whatever has your attention has your interest. So if your attention is in how to have good policies, if your attention is on how to have a healthy environment where there will be a seamless working environment, where unemployment will drastically reduce, then start speaking. My generation are known as generation that speaks up. So speak up, use the tools that you have, and then you will attract the people that matter. So either in Africa, any part of Africa, either in Europe, anywhere, we need to keep speaking out, using the tools that is made available. We are not in power, but we have a power, and that is what is available in the global sphere. So use it, and then I believe that whoever we want to get on board will listen to us using those tools.
Right. I want us to bring back, I'll go back to a friend in South Africa, Luazi Somia. I want us to, we've spoken a lot about the things that we can do to unite us and bring us together. But I want you to also speak on the things that divide us. Africans, have for a long time been divided by religion and tribe. And if you look at some of the most disastrous things that have happened across the continent, it's always, centered around one or two of these items, and it's heartbreaking. So I want you to, speak now on, how we can reduce the divisions that tribe and religion and the likes cause us across Africa, and become better united, understanding our differences, but still being united as young people across Africa.
Outside of jollof and rice, this is a very complicated and very complex sociological question, and what people have been trying to study for decades and decades within our continent. So the first point of departure is from us as Africans understanding who we are. And part of understanding who we are is that understanding that some of the divisions that we have are superficial. Superficial divisions such as the colonial borders that are currently wrapped around our countries are very superficial. They were drawn in 1886 by a group of white men in the middle of Europe who didn't care about our lives, didn't care who we were, didn't care how we lived. But now they've created these divisions based on a piece of paper. Whether or not we choose as Africans to subscribe to that piece of paper is totally up to us. And that will lead to a deep, darker road of self-destruction as the African continent. But fundamentally, what we need to do is to know each other. And part and parcel of this mistrust of knowing each other is the demonization of the other by those who are in power. Because the demonization of the other by those who are in power seeks to achieve for them electoral victory, social mobilization based on either ethnicity, political party, or even national borders or nationality, and also for us to understand that we can go beyond the party politics that these national leaders are trying to pull us into. And part of our parcel is refusing to be drawn into a discourse that will make us hate our fellow human being. Was part of and parcel of who we see each other now is that we don't see each other as human, and because we see each other as a foreigner, as a zamazama, for instance, in South Africa, because people are not human, they're not artisanal miners. They see each other as the other. As soon as you start seeing the other person as the other, you completely dehumanize them. So we as Africans need to start seeing each other as human and not belittle each other to begin with. And thirdly, is for us to come up for greater people-to-people interaction. And that is the beginning cause of greater conversation about let us leave behind these differences and to begin to understand our common objectives. Because you might understand that our common objectives as African states and African people is very common. It is simply to grow our economies, develop our people, and make sure our people live to the best of their full potential. And part and parcel of that is being prevented by external actors outside of this continent that seek to reap from the resources of this continent. However, there are also some amongst us that are preventing us from developing as a continent because they want to line their own pockets because of corruption, and they want to line their own pockets because they want to stay into power. So there will come a point where young people themselves have to be the moral authority within the countries and vote out those who they seek do not benefit their future and best interests. And part of intergenerational solidarity, as the theme of this day is for the older generation to understand that this country is not limited towards us. This continent is not going to die with us. Therefore, we should hand over a continent and a country and a region that is better than when we found it. So far, the senior generation has not realized that. And part and parcel of that, you see them staying on to power, at whatever cost, even at the cost of human lives. We see them staying on to power, even at the cost of regional stability and integration. We see them staying on to power, even at the beck and call of their citizenry. And part and parcel of this is we need to fundamentally deal with those people who form parasitic towards our African governmental agenda going forward.
Okay. Now, thank you for that, Luazi. Let me throw the question to Ina now. Just as Luazi has said, it's a very dicey situation trying to, when it comes to the coming together of youth all over Africa, we do not want our cultural background and our different religious and beliefs to get in the way. But also, as youths from Africa, we have these cultures and identities, ideologies that shape us. So that brings me to my question, Ina. How important is it for the African youth to understand the background of their culture and their tradition and religion and the preservation of it when it comes to, building a stable society? So we are trying to improve and build our society, but we do not want to get rid of our cultural backgrounds because those are the things that shape us. So how important would you say it is for a youth to understand their cultural background and to infuse its preservation into the development of the society?
Thank you very much for the question. I think it's very important. And in understanding our cultures and our traditions, we also understand that and are able to trace our roots and where we come from. I think it's very important to understand where one comes from because when you understand culture and tradition, you also begin to understand the reasons why the older generation or those who came before us had such cultures or traditions or would practice certain things. But while we are mindful of the importance and of the fact that it is important that we stay in touch with our roots, I think it's also important that young people speak against harmful cultural practices, especially on the continent, because one looks at child marriages, for example, in some of our traditions, which is very, very harmful for our young people and our young children. And I think when we have a better understanding of our cultures and our traditions, we will also be in a better position to know what to speak against and how to really address certain issues while obviously having a better understanding of who we are. I think there's beauty in diversity, and understanding who we are also teaches us to understand why things are the way they are, how things should be, and also really borrowing from one another in terms of culture and tradition. I know that in a number of traditions, for example, they will teach young people to speak up or not speak up. And I think those things can be exchanged, for example. So I think it is very important that young people understand who they are, and we can only understand who we are when we are able to trace our roots, and we can be better individuals when we understand and respect the cultures and traditions of others. It really does help in strengthening our relations with one another. It does help and goes a long way in helping us understand how others why they react or how they react to certain things. So there is beauty in diversity. I believe young people could be and will be better leaders than the leaders that we have today because we have a better understanding of one another. And in my language, there's something that says, I wouldn't be able to translate it directly, but it's really being able to understand and wearing someone else's tradition and understanding why things are the way they are.
All right. My next question is going to be going to MAYOWA. I think I had brought it up earlier, but I think I want everyone to respond to it. It's a myth that I have that says that the young people across Africa aren't very different from the leaders that they criticize. They just haven't gotten into power yet, and if they get into power, they'll do pretty much the same thing. So I want you to share your response to that. Do you agree that that is true? That the young people look across across board pretty much the same thing. They just haven't accessed power yet.
Well, I think we've all heard this saying that our leaders are the way we are. That,
people are the reflection.
That our leaders are the way. But the truth is, you name man by what the man does. All right. So the best test of a man is by what he does. Earlier on, my colleagues and we're talking about culture. Culture to me is a way of life, your tradition, your belief system, and every organization has a culture. One of the bedrock for an organization, of an establishment to succeed is its culture. All right. So as a person, what drives you? What's your value system? Mm-hmm. And so if we cannot see that your value system is worthy to take note of, if your value system is not something we can reckon with, the probability that you will go there and represent us is foul, is zero. All right. So I'm indifferent, really, but the truth is the best test of the man is what the man does now. So you can hide it, but the truth, we can see what you produce. And so the people you see representing us now are not just there doing what they are doing today. They started some time ago. So we are not just paying attention because we are more concerned about how we all want to get there. But rather than striving, working hard to see how every one of us want to get, why not just focus on somebody and watch what's the pattern? What has this person been doing? Is there value systems that needs to be checked? What has this person been doing? Does this person understand the how? There's always a how to every business. There's always a how to present, and I can't do what you're doing if I don't understand the how. So we must put all of these checks and balances in place before saying, okay, go and represent us. So for every younger person like myself, the question is, Mayowa, what have you been doing? Can we track back to see that this person can represent us? Is your value system aligned with what the nation is right now? Those are questions the young person needs.
So better questions need to be asked with our leadership recruitment process, basically.
That's
Luazi, I want you to also respond to the same question, that young Africans are no different from the people that they criticize. The only difference really is that they haven't gotten power yet. But if they find themselves in those positions, they will do pretty much the same. Do you agree?
I both agree and disagree. So my agreement part is that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely, according to that saying, we've seen it with a lot of revolutionary liberation movement heroes that over the decades, as they've gone in further into power, you've seen instances such as Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, Jacob Zuma in South Africa, etc., etc. So all these play into Yoweri Museveni in Uganda. So these people over time were once revolutionary, fighting for the ideals of the people, but then over time, the power corrupted them. But at the same time, what we also realize is that the older generation has not lived in a post-colonial society outside of power, especially from former liberation movement countries that are still governed by former liberation movements. And therefore, the current youth are susceptible for a different material condition and a different oppressor, what they feel is a different oppressor than the older generation. And therefore, there are different lessons that they are learning, even that came from the mistakes that are made by the older generation. And hopefully our generation is able to learn those lessons, including that we should not forsake the moral principles that got us there, that the moral principles that got us there into power. We should not forsake those, including betrayal of our people that we've been advocating for in the future. And that is some of the lessons that we need to take into consideration. So when you see other countries such as China that are developing really well, they have not forgotten their cultures and they have not put that aside. They're simply integrated that in a modern context. And therefore, that's the lesson that we need to take context. And that's the lesson we need to take as African states, is that we need to modernize even our cultures to suit how we now progress as a continent in order for us to facilitate development. We will not be development at all costs, but it will be a uniquely African conquest of trying to ensure that our people live to their best potential. And that is why when we analyze the future of leadership, it will be those lessons taken from the former liberation movement.
All right.
And also the modernization period that we currently undergoing.
Okay, so Ina, in 1 minute, what do you think about this school of thought?
Sorry, I couldn't get that.
So generally, Osaoge brought up an ideology that a lot of people have been debating about, that the fact that the youth are not there yet doesn't mean when they get there, they won't do the same thing the older ones have done. So in essence, the youth are not different from the older ones. They're just not there yet. So what do you think about that?
Well, I don't think our generation can be compared to the older generation. I don't think young people will become what our leaders are today. I think instead of asking whether young people are ready to take up office, we should actually ask, is the space ready to accommodate young people? Put the political systems in place in our various countries, understand and be able to help young people be the best they can be. And in fact, any person be the best they can be. I don't think so. And that's why we find in most African countries where there are young people in political office or in leadership positions, especially in liberation movements, they are taught to toe the line and not be themselves. They are told to do as others have been doing over since independence, and not taught to be themselves. They're not taught to lead differently and be confident. I don't think the older generation inspires courage. I don't think it inspires young people to be the best that they can be.
Wow. And that's, I mean, those are things that we have repeatedly spoken about. As much as we want young people to take positions of leadership, you know, they still are not given the chance. And every now and then there's some new proposal, there's a new bill, there's some, you know, new, convention that has been held to encourage more young people to get into office, you know, but it makes no sense if you're trying to get them, or making these statements about getting them into office, but still making it so difficult to have, you know, let them enter.
Very true.
And, you know, I think you should also speak about women in politics and in governance across Africa. Where are we with that? This is 2022.
We have a long way to go. You know, the other day I was having a conversation with my colleagues, and it was about gender equality and women empowerment and so forth and so forth. And while we do understand we need women in office, we need young people in office, I think it's very important that we don't empower women for the wrong reasons. One, in fact, there are two aspects to this conversation. One, we need to ensure that the women we put in office is able to stand up in parliament and put forth a motion or table a motion that is aimed at empowering another woman. Two, I think there is a conversation that needs to be had about women who are in office and don't advocate or do so little for women, and to ensure that the space is able to accommodate, or we actually make it easy for women to enter politics, for women to govern, for women to lead institutions. And I also think there's a third aspect to that, and it is putting women in positions and withhold or remain with the power and deny them the power or the tools that could make them effective in those particular spaces and positions. So I think we have a long way to go, but I do think there are countries that are doing great in terms of having young people in office, in terms of having women who are not just put as for cosmetic purposes, but ensure that at least they are given the power and the tools to ensure that they support and serve the mandate that they're put there for.
So much, Ina, for that. And, you know, this goes a long way to say that regardless of our skepticism as to whether the youth can perform well or not, when we see the youth going forward to try to represent us in any little way, we have to support them in every way that we can. Thank you so much, Ina. And this also goes to all our guests. Ina and Gary, thank you so much. Dr. Faith Umar-Bia, he joined us earlier. Thank you so much, Dr. Faith, in absentia. Thank you to Gaia Ben Mbarak and Trevor Shaku. And thank you to our guests in-house, MAYOWA John AJIBODU. And also thank you to Luwazi Somwa. It's been a beautiful conversation here on News Central Television about the International Youth Day.
Absolutely. And so we say happy International Youth Day to all our viewers across the continent and beyond. Thank you very much for joining us. And we will see you again very, very soon.
My name is Blessings Musugu.
And I am Osaogi Ogbonwa.